Happy last day of summer from Austin, Texas. On behalf of the NMC, I'm delighted to welcome you to the NMC Beyond the Horizon. There's an increasing interest in using new sources of data for personalizing the learning experience, ongoing formative assessment of learning, and performance measurement. This interest is spurring the development of a relatively new field, data-informed learning and assessment. In this one-hour discussion, our moderator and panelists will focus on leveraging data to build better pedagogies, empowering students to take an active part in their learning, targeting at-risk student populations, and generally assessing factors affecting completion and student success. I am your host today, Alex Freeman, Senior Director of Membership and Special Projects at the NMC. I'm joined by Gordon Jackson, who is here to assist with technical support. If you're on Twitter, our hashtag today is NMCHZ. That's hashtag NMCHZ, and I'll put that in the chat so you can see that. Now on to the moderator of today's program, Rick Sluter, Vice Provost for Student Success at Middle Tennessee State University. So I'll go around the group here and introduce Tanya Justin. She's the Director of Digital Learning Research and Development and Co-Director, National Research Center for Distance Education and Technological Advancements at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. Our second panelist is Jack Seuss, VP of IT and CIO at University of Maryland, Baltimore County. Next is David Thomas, Director of Academic Technology, University of Colorado, Denver. I'll go ahead and kind of get the discussion going by just getting a brief introduction of each of our panelists. So Tanya, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
For the last couple of years, I've moved into a new position, and so our provost had decided that we should focus a little bit more on research, and so I've taken over the position which was created for digital education research and development. Shortly after that, we wrote a grant and received funding from the U.S. Department of Education, FIPSE, to launch the National Research Center for Distance Education and Technological Advancements. So the acronym is DETA. We call it DATA because that's much more fun and nerdy than DATA would be. So we call it the Data Research Center. So for the past couple of years, we have been working on efforts to ensure access and success for students in distance education. And specifically what we're looking to do is identify key factors, instructional factors and institutional factors that influence positively, hopefully, student outcomes. And so we are doing this by conducting cross-institutional research. So we have about 10 institutions that we're working with right now in order to do this. So that's a little bit about what we're doing right now.
Okay, great. How about you, Jack? Tell us a little bit about about yourself and what you're doing over there at UMBC.
Sure. Thank you, Alex. So my background, I've been at UMBC. This is actually my 35th year as a staff member, and I was an undergraduate, which when you think of 40 years out of the 50 that we've been in existence, I'm really feeling old. UMBC for the last decade has been really focused on improving retention, and we've done a really good job over the last 6 or 7 years. We've seen our 6-year graduation rate move up around 7 points from, say, 58% to 65, 66. One of the things, though, that we really looked at in the last year or two is trying to understand why that was and what were the programs that we were doing that were making a difference. And what we realized is we really didn't have the kind of data system that was in place to be able to tell us exactly what was making a difference. And so over the last year and a half, I've been working on a project where we're really sort of re-instrumenting the university to be trying to really fine-tune and get down to what kinds of interventions are making a difference and really sort of building out that infrastructure. And so that's what I'm interested in talking a little bit about.
Okay, great. Before I turn it back over to Rick, I want David to give us a little background about yourself.
Yeah, thanks. My name is David Thomas. I'm the Director of Academic Technology at the University of Colorado Anschutz Medical Campus here in Denver, Colorado. I think our situation is very similar to what Jack just described. We're in the process of really trying to pull together a whole lot of data systems into a kind of an intelligent view so we can do much more sophisticated reporting and analytics and distribution and sharing of data. So, as an administrator, I'm super excited about what we can do with data so we can stop arguing about facts. As a faculty member, I'm kind of paranoid that people are going to use this data for evil. So kind of look at both sides of that, but looking forward to the discussion.
All right, thanks, David. And now, Rick, let's see if your audio is working all right.
Alex, can you hear me okay right now?
I can. So we just did just a brief introduction. If you could introduce yourself and then get into the program.
Absolutely. And so thanks so much. Some kind of technical glitch, but I got out and then got back in. And so hopefully things are fine now. And so my name is Rick Sluter, Vice Provost for Student Success at Middle Tennessee State University. And so our story is one where we're focused on student success, but that story includes really 4 elements. In the past 2 years, we've hired 47 advisors and brought those advisors in and employed predictive analytics and engaged those advisors strategically to work on the initiative to improve completion, retention, and of course persistence and then progression. So that's really been our story. We've done some other things in using data to redesign 27 courses, high enrolled threshold courses. And then the other part of our data utilization is to include like a regular report to all the campus leaders that's weekly that gets some update information as we move forward. So the story here has been a great one. I've been here for 2 years, and over the last 3 years, our retention rate for new freshmen has increased 12%. All the other metrics trend in exactly the right direction in terms of transfers, sophomores, our students who complete at least 30 hours in their first year for freshmen has gone from 42% to 50%. Now we're starting to see that our completion rates, even this early at the 4, 5, and 6 year windows are improving. And so it's been a great story here at MTSU. We welcome the opportunity to be a part of the panel, and then we have 3 great panelists to guide us through some discussions today in terms of using data to influence what happens at institutions. So maybe the place to start here is just a general question, and it's to our panelists. And so many people are doing so many things with data and in their student success initiatives. Here's the question: of all the initiatives using data, and it's for each of our panelists, which has been the most impactful? And it could be 1 or 2.
I'll sort of step back. I'm going to answer your question, but I'm not. But I think you'll appreciate my answer. And what I think is the most important thing that we have done is begun to change the culture around making student success something that we consider our responsibility and our priority. And I know that sounds trite, but up until we had really made a decision to do this, it wasn't the case that people were viewing student success as the individual responsibility of the faculty, staff, and university. It was more viewed as it's on the student shoulders to be, are they going to be successful or not? And I think what that has bubbled up is that it has sort of forced a metamorphosis to happen within the university that's taken 6 or 7 years, and we're still on this journey of now moving into predictive analytics and more sophisticated risk assessments and all of that. But I have to say it sort of started with changing the culture around trying to make student success an institutional priority for a variety of reasons.
Jack, one follow-up question. I think the old adage is like when everybody's responsible, nobody's accountable for student success in particular. So has anything changed organizationally there at your institution that would have been, one of the forces that change culture?
So to the credit of our last 3 provosts over the last decade is that all 3 provosts have made student success sort of part of their key portfolio that they're trying to drive. And what that has done is we have established a dean of undergraduate education, and that position has really been the driver of looking at this. And the reason we put it in that area is that we ultimately view student success as being enabled by some administrative interventions, but also by a series of academic intervention or academic transformations. What we realized is that we have to redo some of the courses that we have. We're a very STEM-centric school, and what we were teaching STEM the way it's always been taught, and what we're realizing is that isn't what needs to happen as we start to go forward. And so we're really looking at rethinking the introductory STEM sequence and trying to move to active learning and new kinds of pedagogy and figure out how we can be a model for teaching differently this STEM paradigm.
Yeah, so David and Tanya, any comments about the culture and the influence that it plays as we move our way through these initiatives?
Yeah, you bet. I'd sort of chime in on one thing. You know, the area of data has moved so quickly in the last 5 years that I think that we're all navigating the reality that we're implementing things that we're not 100% sure what the impacts are going to be. So when you talk about positive change, I'd say we're looking mostly at anticipated positive change. Now, there's great programmatic success, and I think, you know, some of the success that you guys have mentioned is evidence of that. But we don't necessarily know, can we ascribe that to data, or is it, you know, interventions at advising or other curricular interventions? When you just look at the idea of like what's data doing for us, I think we kind of all have to stay very well aware of what's going on. I know in our environment, things I'm most hopeful about, I like to joke that I think we're moving from, in a culture, we're moving away from arguing about facts, which I know is sort of silly, but in the past, so often we get entrenched in policy discussions that aren't based on facts. They're based on impressions. They're based on very parochial views of data. And I think as we get data in people's hands, we can finally start to not argue about whether or not that number is going up or down, but what we can do about it. And I think that this is the ambition that I have, and this is really where the culture change will come if we're all successful. And it's changing the data culture from an administrative reporting culture of putting reports in the hands of senior administrators to a data culture where, you know, everyone from the top to the bottom, students, faculty, have really meaningful, detailed data that's not necessarily a report, so that we can actually start to answer our own questions. To me, that's what's exciting. It's exciting to get data into the hands of people that can use it, instead of what's often been the case in the past, which is to put data in the hands of people that really are so far up the organization, they only have, you know, a limited set of options of what they can do with it.
Tanya?
Okay. Yeah, I think Jack is making a really important point. You know, it's really hard to say sort of what initiative has been most impactful, because we're sort of all just starting and figuring this out, right? That's why we're having this panel today, is like, hey, what's going on and what are we doing and what should we be doing? And to reemphasize what Jack was saying, I think it's a really key point that our organizational culture is finally prioritizing student success. As many of us known for decades, that was not necessarily a priority of the post-secondary organizational culture. Traditionally, in higher ed, it was very much weeding out, you know. It's okay that 30% of the people failed my COM 100 course because those weren't going to be the COM majors. It's okay that students were dropping out of college because we had plenty of them coming into, coming through our doors. But we're at a time where things have changed. We have less 18-year-olds walking through our doors because there's less of them that exist. We're battling with lower enrollments. And we also have a government that's made it very clear that we need to provide access to students. We need to ensure success, college completion, employability, for those students. And so we want to make sure that all students are successful. So I think that's a really huge point. We also have seen this turn economically, and I think that has made data more important as well. So I think the one key is the fact that there is this new focus on success, and there's I'm in Wisconsin here, things are a little slim when it comes to resources. And so we want to make sure that what we're doing, that we have an idea that it's going to work, because we don't have a lot of resources or the capacity to have, you know, a bunch of initiatives going on. We need to know that it's going to work, and we need to have evidence that it's working. Otherwise, we need to be moving on to something else. And so I think just this whole organizational change to focus on this, I think this move to just focus on data, we've had data for a long time, and lots of us never did anything with it except use to report to our accrediting bodies or the government, whatever we needed to. And I think also what both Jack and David were talking about is sort of this move for this focus on evidence-based interventions. So, you know, Jack had talked about the fact that they want to have different pedagogical models for the STEM area. And so that's something that we need to ensure that we're doing, that we're just not out there just, you know, sort of like, woo, let's see if this works. That we want to make sure that we're gathering evidence, that we're using the data in meaningful ways so that we know that our interventions, whether they're inside of the classroom or outside of the classroom, you know, are working. So, you know, I was just listening to Glenda Morgan talk like last week on this video, and I think a lot of times we forget sort of how new this whole area is, whether we're talking about learner analytics or learning analytics or institutional analytics. The point, as David had mentioned, that we're moving beyond just the reports, and everybody can use these to increase the success of their units and serving instructors and serving students. It's really cool that we're moving in this direction.
Yeah, so I'm listening with interest, you know, and so there's 45 people on the panel today, 45 people in attendance to the webinar, and there's 4 of us, of course, on the panel. And then I think of those 4,600 other institutions in our country, you know, and so surely the panelists are on the lead edge of use of data and applications and making change to improve student success. And so the question I raise is you know, your sense about, you know, are these panelists on the leading edge, or is everybody in the same, you know, kind of wave that is going to wash over higher? Something tells me that's not true, but I'm interested in the impressions that you've got in terms of, you know, where everybody's at in this movement to make a difference in student success and improve learning outcomes.
I'll kick this one off. I think, you know, I mean, higher ed's always had the education mission near and dear to its heart, and Tanya's really analyzed some of the reasons why in the past maybe we haven't kept our eye on the prize. The environment shifted, and I think everyone's really starting to think differently about, you know, student success, and that's awesome. You know, data is this new tool that we have. I mean, you know, large data, or, you know, really fast data, or data visualization, whatever you want to look at. But here's what it inspires me and frightens me. Higher ed is so far behind in terms of what's available. I mean, you know, get your Google out. Google what Airbnb's data infrastructure looks like. Airbnb's like, what, 5 years old? I mean, what they do with data is just like crazy. It's amazing. I mean, it makes what we do with data look really immature and kind of, you know, facile. So that's the scary part. The exciting part is, great, the market has created amazing data infrastructures that we can start to use and start to answer and ask really important questions about, you know, our populations. And so, you know, I kind of feel like we're in this really interesting time where, man, we're living in the future. We just need to wake up and realize that and take advantage of it.
You know, I agree with you, David. It's one of those where I've been following the personalized medicine healthcare model, where sort of looking at this and you know, as you begin to bring that back into the higher ed culture, and I know the executive advisory board's been very big with that sort of model where they're sharing that in the education space, but I think it's one that it allows us to sort of come in and take advantage of some of the work that's been done in some other areas and really begin to apply it in some unique ways. And you know, for us at UMBC, one of the interesting things that I'm really trying to focus on is we've had this slogan for years. We've called ourselves an honors university in Maryland. And you know, what does it mean? Well, you know, you're supposed to define it. But we've internally been asking this question for 20 years. Are we giving every student sort of a special experience as part of higher ed? And the answer is we don't know. we know all the students that we give special experiences to. They're in all these little silos. What we don't know is what students aren't in any of the silos that have been populated here on the campus. And so we're going back now and really trying to focus on understanding who is getting certain kinds of special opportunities. And then when we find students at 45, 60, 90 credits who haven't gotten something, it's really working with them and their advisor to try to now make sure that they do get some sort of special experience that maybe it's just an internship, or maybe it's some other activity that's going to help them connect their learning that they have to the real world. But we really think that this kind of focus on making sure that we can actually dig deeper into the students and what they're seeing and doing is going to help us long-term be a better institution.
Tanya, any comments?
Yeah, I'm sort of going to go back a little, but I think Jack raises a really important point about the student voice. And so I think a lot of times the students aren't even at the table in a lot of these discussions when we're talking about what to do with their data, how their data is going to be used. I think another really interesting point is we spend a lot of time looking at the data and not asking the students what's going on. We're not asking them for their stories. We're not gathering narratives. We're not gathering any qualitative data. We're not doing mixed methods, research designs. And I think it's really important that we move beyond the numbers and start approaching from a more interpretive paradigm what's going on with students and asking them in what ways can we help. You know, some of the research that we're doing at the Data Research Center is exactly that, is sort of taking a mixed methods approach. So yes, we'll try to measure certain variables to understand how they influence student outcomes, but we're also asking students, like, what do you think your instructor could do better? You know, what do you think about this and that? And then analyzing that. So I think as institutions, we need to not be sort of scared to make that investment in that sort of research. Back to sort of the original question, what I think is really interesting is when we talk about data, we're in a very exploratory phase. You know, we're just trying to figure out what data we got, you know, where we can put it, how we analyze it, how we use it, how it relates to these interventions. And a lot of institutions, you know, what we're seeing is, which I don't necessarily encourage, is like, oh, we need to be doing something with data. Let's run out and get a vendor to like help solve our problems. And so I think for those that are listening, just be careful to run out and get a vendor to solve your problems. I think you need to look inside your institution first and develop a strategy. And I know strategy has come up several times, but I think a lot of institutions don't even have a strategy for the use of data for success, beyond just institutional services, but also for the pedagogy and for instructional sort of characteristics and design and those sorts of things. I think the second piece of having strategy becomes investment. And investment is not just a contract with a vendor. I think investment is building awareness across your campus, understanding what knowledge exists in which silos, building that transparency, and bringing in different stakeholders that can help move that strategy forward. And so until there's a strategy and that investment in your own institution, then go out and find out what your needs are and what vendor can possibly help you solve those needs.
So thanks. And then, all of us have talked in a previous conversation about people looking for institutions looking for a solution. And so often that's seen as a purchase of a software service or something that's going to be, seen as that answer that really will get to be the end all for everyone. And surely that's not going to happen. One of the questions raised by our viewers, what do you think are the most pressing challenges associated with integrating student data across different disciplines? It's in the same landscape that we're talking about right now. We have large institutions that are complex bureaucracies that have a lot of different things going on. And so at the same time, the institutions that seem to be making the most progress have almost a unified interest that kind of galvanizes a campus as much as can be said to get things to happen. So let's, if we could, I'm interested in your impressions about what can be done. What are the challenges to get things to happen with data across campus?
I'll go ahead and take this one first. I think this is two different, I see this as sort of two-pronged. And one of the areas I've been sort of tackling, so it comes to not just different disciplines, but from different technological platforms. So how do you get the SIS data and the instructional technology platform data and the early alert data and the data from all of these different areas into one place? I think that's one issue. And two, how do you identify what data is meaningful? You don't need to be bringing in everything and the kitchen sink. You need to start figuring out which variables and measures that are in those data warehouses in different silos are actually meaningful, and then bringing those together. Now, I know obviously there's some top vendors that are out there that are working on these big open data warehouses. That either you give someone your data, there's a movement to actually potentially open up these data warehouses. The software technology is OER based on sort of these caliper standards. So I think caliper standards are going to help a lot with this, but still we need to know what's meaningful. Big data is really useless unless we actually know what measures are meaningful and are going to help us identify interventions to increase student success. The second prong of that is actually diffusing evidence-based practices across disciplines, which is a pedagogical challenge that we've had for decades. What works in the social sciences might not work in the natural sciences. And so a lot of times we do these one-off studies of what works in this class, or maybe this group of classes in this one discipline, and then you go over to, the natural sciences, let's say, or engineering, and they're like, nope, that's not going to work for us. And so I think that is a challenge, is figuring out how can we diversify our studies to ensure that we're representing all 4 disciplines, so that when we promote on our campuses pedagogical practice or a technological use, we know that it works in all disciplines and not just one-offs. Otherwise, we're never going to be able to diffuse these practices across campuses.
Sort of jumping in, I mean, we've been spending the last 2 years sort of creating this integrated business intelligence environment on the campus. And the one area that we've just this year really started to begin making some progress adding into is the student affairs space. What we see happening in student affairs, especially around involvement of students in student organizations, leadership development, student government, these kinds of activities, this stuff has all been sort of never captured in systems that we've worried about. Yet we know that this kind of engagement in these activities ultimately has strong correlation with student graduation and student success. And so we finally are starting to bring these kinds of things into our systems. Where I think the key for me has been is that if we don't collect data across as many things as we think are important, then as we're trying to develop the impact of interventions, we may, because we haven't collected it, we may not know that that student is getting some outside treatment that is actually influencing their behavior. And so it's hard to do the real intervention impact. And so we're really taking the measure that we want to go as wide as we can. If you think that your activity is designed to be improving student retention or graduation, we want to be capturing data on it. And then at that point, we want to give you data back, so that what we really think is the issue is often that units aren't targeting their interventions to the groups that they really intended them for. And I'll give a classic example. We started a first-year seminar program here, and the thought is that this would connect students who might be unengaged with faculty members in real small classes in their freshman year and be very helpful in a retention process. What we ended up finding is that almost 90% of these students are students who are in our honors college, in our humanities scholars. They're in either a scholars program or the honors college, where they already get lots of hand-holding. If we put regular students in those classes, they almost feel overwhelmed because now they're one of 2 students competing against 18 kids in the honors college, and they're wondering why they're struggling in that. And so we almost had a negative impact in thinking about the first year seminar program. And so it's really interesting that until you collect data and analyze it, you don't necessarily realize who is going to be consuming all of these programs and interventions that you've set up. And often you're just giving people who have lots of opportunity even more opportunity. And that's not a bad thing, but it can be expensive. And so that's just something that universities have to be thinking about.
David?
I think these are good insights. Reflecting on this, I guess if I had to add anything, and I realize the audience is diverse, right? Some of you folks are doing really amazing things that I would be, jealous of, and others are probably just getting started. But there's a kind of some common threads that I would point to that I think we should all think about. I mean, one is that higher ed uses data. We always have. I mean, someone in the chat mentioned, every professor's got a grade book. Every college, every department's got notes. We got data coming out our ears. What I think that we have to really face up to the fact is that we have baked what so-called governance into the data. And because of that, everyone's very jealously guarding their data all the time. And they say, oh, I can't give it to them. They won't know how to use it. They won't know what it means. And a lot of times it's true. I mean, attendance in course A is going to be tracked differently than attendance in course B. And if you throw it on the same database, you don't have normal results out of that. So what's the solution? Well, the solution is really probably 2 pieces. One is to bizarrely collect absolutely everything. I mean, Google data lakes. That's the new hot idea in data. Just take everything, just put it, warehouse it, hang on to it, and then wait for questions to emerge. And as you have questions, then intelligently, inquire in that data. And in order for that to work, it can't be a set of specialists that do this work. It needs to be kind of anyone can ask questions and anyone can get in there and see stuff. And that's really scary because that changes governance completely of data. For me, in order to make intelligent decisions about my course or my discipline, maybe I need to look at your courses and your disciplines. And that's a sea change, guys. It's not a vendor. It's not a technology. It's a way of thinking. And I think that we're all trying to figure out in each and every organization what that looks like, what's palatable, what's legal, what we can actually get done. But at the end of the day, you kind of have to come back and say, our biggest challenges aren't technology right now. The technology is like they got it off a spaceship somewhere. Our challenges are how to put this stuff to work.
I would argue that we want to, as part of our strategy, I think we should figure out those questions right now. We have a lot of questions on our campuses that we're already asking ourselves. Rick has talked about the initiative on his campus. We know that we want to increase student retention, right? We don't want, I think we talked before, we're around 40% at UWM. That's pretty typical for a large public institution. So we know that is one challenge. We know that we have certain courses, I don't know if I call them bottleneck, but I definitely would call them a barrier to college completion. So I think there are questions that we can already ask ourselves at our institutions and start identifying what data is meaningful for us to answer those questions. I think if we just start, going into the data blindly and sort of those sorts of things, next thing you know, what we were talking about before, and then there was this recent article on that initiative fatigue. What are the questions that we want to be answering at our institutions right now with the data that we have? 2, let's go out and find where that meaningful data lives that's going to help us answer those questions. And now let's move forward and either build a capacity on our campuses or in our institutions to conduct this research, or go out and find a vendor that's going to make it happen for you. And then start, exploring what are the interventions. What's the research out there that shows that interventions work for what we're seeing, or maybe we need to do our own sort of pilots to figure out some things.
So one of our attendees raises a question that fits in this space or at least makes a comment. And so I like the comment, and it is, how many institutions are hiring or have in place a chief data officer? Typically we're thinking of retention as somebody who's in charge of student success. And so that's the marshal for the forces that are employed to make a difference for students. And then all of our work that we're talking about really requires some expertise, requires some, integration and coordination across campuses. And so I'm curious about your reflections in terms of what the need is at the institutional level as we think of the future, and accessing these data, making sure that they're available, and all those things. So it's a question partly on behalf of one of our viewers, and then also in the space we're talking about.
So this is Jack. I mean, I think that I like to think around maturity models, and what I would say is a campus that is at an introductory space, hiring a chief data officer may actually be a mistake. You may need more cooperation before you're bringing in a chief data officer. If you don't have IR, IT, registrar agreeing on what the quality of the data is, having a chief data officer, she or he may or may not be able to be effective in their role. And so I think that where you start to see these kinds of titles of chief data officer, it's probably a boutique title that is around someone who has a special capability, but they're also at a special institution where it fits what they're trying to do. I don't see it right now as something that I would look at as being the first place that I would try to say all institutions should go hire a chief data officer, because frankly, I don't know what they would actually, I think they would be doing something different at almost every institution right now. And so that would make it harder rather than better that they start into that path.
I think what Jack says really mirrors kind of my observation that these aren't technology problems. They used to be. The technology used to be incredibly expensive, and so you had to hire specialists just to make sure you spent your millions of dollars correctly. And now you can run business intelligence grade software off your desktop, through the cloud. I mean, it's insane. I'll speak to kind of our experience. I manage the online unit by and large, and have academic responsibilities, and I work for the CIO, so I'm an IT guy, right? As we try to move these initiatives forward, I spend a lot of time, assuring our IR and registrars that I'm not going to break the law, and that I'm not going to put them out of work. It's really like it's like a missionary story. You're trying to transform a lot of things simultaneously. So, your single biggest challenge in getting the data into the format that you can answer good questions is going to be political, unless you happen to work for an organization that already has all the politics lined up. But most of us probably don't have that privilege, so we have to build partnerships, we have to change thinking, and then we can introduce technology that'll make a difference.
I think that's a really good point, is starting with engaging all of the important stakeholders or folks in the different areas of the campus. I think one of the challenges that we've been dealing with, or that I've been struggling with, is how do we move beyond our institution? So, it's one thing for us to start aggregating our data across the different silos on our campuses and engaging those folks. But we've really had a challenge of, in conducting cross-institutional research, is folks wanting to share their data, or having an openness sort of ideology about data and how meaningful it can be, even if de-identified. Institutions who participate in our studies, in no way are they identifiable. But how important it is for us in the future to have a more open mindset about data and data sharing across institutions. And so I think when we really talk about what's working and what's not working at our institutions in the future, that's going to become really important. I know several people probably listening to this right now are like, oh my gosh, sharing across institutions our data. But I think at some point that's where things need to go if we want to know if these practices are really working across institutions.
Well, certainly the vendors, when you give your data to Civitas or EAB or PAR, they're trying to look across institutions to take advantage of scale for some of the things. And I was just going to put a plug in. One of the things we've started using is, while we're not a member of the full PAR framework, we have been using their student success matrix, which they had it's a web-based interface where you define your interventions and you identify who the target population is and what part of the student life cycle that's taking place in. And what we found is that that's actually a starting point for beginning to be able to talk to other schools about what are they doing and at what point and where and for whom. And so I think with those kinds of common data definitions, you can now begin to get to the point of being able to say, our data is comparable, let's merge these data sets across multiple institutions. But for campuses that are starting out trying to track the interventions, I am a big fan of the student success matrix. It might be a little overkill, but I think it has all of the right features that if you tailor it for your institution, it's a good starting point for trying to sort of document who's doing what to whom and at what point in their academic cycle.
You know, we actually worked off of the work of PAR in developing what we call the data research toolkit. So we put together code books that were shared variables and measures and actual coding that would help us in the merging of data sets across institutions. And so I think, you know, when we talk about caliper standards you know, PAR and their shared definitions that they worked with in an array of institutions to put together, I think that's a really great start. And when we talk about some of the organizations and the fact that we're giving them our data, at K-12, it's a whole different beast, right? And a lot of us saw what happened with In Bloom. But, you know, it's very interesting that a lot of these are, again, corporate vendors that are, or have become corporate, that are taking the data and making these, you know, running these different tests and analysis and so forth. It's really interesting that we haven't come together with a consortium or something that's more federally funded for us to support this work, you know, in order to identify what's meaningful and to document the interventions at the different institutions and those sorts of things.
So there's been some discussion here, great discussion, but there's been some discussion earlier about that much of our battle is political. You know, it's internal to our campuses in terms of getting that culture set so that it's welcoming and it's ready to use data to make decisions and to make changes, more importantly. And it's, I wonder if our panelists would comment on an issue I think that people struggle with when they're first looking at what maybe they should do to get started, and that is, should we do this in-house, or should we think about bringing a vendor in to move forward our initiative?
I'll jump on that and tell you, it's probably both. I mean, the vendors and the what's available out there in services is awesome, but unless you got a lot of, I mean, let's just face facts. One of our biggest data problems is that our data is messy. It's messy because our business processes, so to speak, are messy. I mean, what we're very familiar with is the fact that an enrollment's not an enrollment's an enrollment. You know, a credit hour is not a credit hour is not a credit hour. I mean, we all face this. You know, what's continuing ed, or is that on campus? Is it online? And all that data definition stuff is really hairy. And vendors will offer to do it for you, but at the end of the day, you've got the brain power and the expertise in-house. So, you know, even if you really don't feel like you got a BI platform or expertise in your university, your organization, you're still going to have to rely on your IR people. You're still going to have a huge commitment in-house. And then again, you actually may have people that are already doing this. I mean, I find here that we have people bringing in vendors sometimes, then internal organizations are like, why are you spending money to have people pull reports that I already have? So, you know, we have a lot of left-hand, right-hand kind of stuff, and it's just the nature of the university, I think. But, you know, I would just say your sweet spot is figure out what expertise and needs you have in-house before you go out. Your vendor partnerships will be more healthy.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly that with that. I mean, I think that to the extent that you have a solid foundation for business intelligence, I mean, what we find is that we're actually using 4 different groups to do predictive analytics. So we just signed on, we're going to be working with Civitas. We were an early customer with EAB in their academic performance systems. We are working with Blackboard on in-class predictive models. And we've got our own group that's doing some data science work where we pulled some faculty and students in to be modeling some problem space in looking at applicants and other sorts of groups that we want to understand. Could we do a better job on the front end of who is actually being admitted and things like that to the university? And so, again, that's being facilitated by the fact that we had a robust infrastructure where we could easily get data. And the tools, most of the tools now are open source. And so it's really not that costly if you've got people who've got some data science capabilities. And the good thing about universities is you have a lot of smart people that are at universities. And so you can often sort of work with them. And if nothing else, I am always anxious to work with faculty who want to get data and do research around their activities, because seeing that interest, that's a great way of, one, validating what we're getting from external vendors, but also pulling them in to really do interesting projects.
Yeah, I agree with what both of you are saying. The one thing that I've noticed that I think that should be sort of cautionary for some of us is that, we were talking a lot about data scientists and computer scientists and what they do with the data. And a lot of times I'm seeing a gap between the folks who know what to do with these different technological systems that hold data and those who actually understand social and learning theory. So at lots of the, top companies and so forth, they've got these amazing people that can do really awesome stuff with data, and they're data mining, to solve problems or come up with things that actually influence student success. But there is a gap in understanding what actual student behaviors and instructor behaviors or those sorts of things, or staff behaviors, whether it's advising, actually influence theoretically student interactions, engagement, student success. Even just the concept of the construct of engagement drives me crazy. This is something 50 years in the making. There is decades of academic research. And tech companies have reduced engagement to being how often do you touch the technology, which is not theoretically engagement at all. With saying your technology engages students, you're just making them touch it. But anyway, so I think one of the things we need to be careful or aware of when you're looking for a vendor or you're developing the capacity at your institution to do this kind of work beyond data science, which is just a really cool, sexy word, I think. From what I've learned, they're usually computer scientists or something like that, is making sure that you have, and I know learning science is a really cool word too, making sure that you have people who understand social and learning theory and how that is going to help you identify what data matters and what data doesn't. Or even what your question should be.
Yeah, so David mentioned earlier a topic I think that catches people's attention, and it has to do with the dark side of data. And it's been reflected upon, in different ways as we've kind of progressed our discussion. That dark side of data could be in the simple ways, things like DFW rates, which tend to be very, very powerful in terms of their, distribution. And so we have, the dark side of data that might be at that level. And then the dark side of data, when I'm listening to all of you about predictive analytics and the identification of students that may struggle in particular areas. And, there's surely a large conversation about the utility and the ethical questions that arise in how those data are used. So I wonder if each of our panelists would talk a little bit about that. How do we move beyond that dark side fear that really encompasses the discussion before we can get to another place about how the data informs us and points us to particular actions?
Well, I'll go kind of quickly first and say I think there's a culture of data that you need to avoid the dark side of data. The data fear is really real, right? Like people, process, behaviors have been existing in the shadows. We do stuff we shouldn't do. And if the data shows that, that's kind of scary. The data shows that, oh, I'm just making this up, right? If I'm a teacher and it turns out that I have really bad outcomes, and then you observe to the LMS that I only spend an hour a week teaching, I'm like, that's data speaking to something that is not good, right? that's a reasonable thing that I should fear I'm being watched if I'm not doing my job. Now, I'm not saying that's writ large, just an example. So there's a real fear of data, and some of that is like, I'm sorry, yeah, like when you shine light, this is Batman, right? We'll run the vermin out, but I'm exaggerating. But what do you do to have a healthy data culture to avoid the dark side of data, to avoid bad data artifacts, making assumptions about things that aren't there, bad correlations, or breaking privacy? I mean, all the things that really, really matter. And I'd say there's three things. I think you need three things in your data culture. The first is you need a culture of data curiosity, right? Not reports anymore. I'm not given, here's what I'm supposed to do, but I'm just curious about data. I want to know what the data means. I want to know how it works. Second thing is, I would say, a sophistication of data use. There's a science to data for a reason. I mean, correlation doesn't mean cause, right? We all know that, but there are lots of correlations that are artificial. You need to understand methodologies, at least on a user level. You need to understand what the data means that you're looking at. And the third thing is, and this is super duper important, and this is hard for us, strangely, is a habit of openness. We live in a world where peer review is the idea that keeps truth front and center. Our culture of data use in higher ed is very much like, don't look at my data, don't criticize my data, just look at what I told you. We have to have a world of data openness so that you can look at my assumptions, you can look at my data, you can correct mistakes. That'll fix it. So I think that in order to avoid the dark side of data, we need those things, and then I think we'll be okay.
So adding on to that, I think, those are three great points. And I sort of take your openness and I would expand it to say that we're making sure that we are involving, we're a very governance-driven institution. And frankly, because we have strong buy-in for the fact that we work with governance closely, we're actually able to make changes faster than sometimes you would think, because people know we're going to communicate, we're going to share. And so, to me, it's making sure you have governance in place to be going through these thorny questions, making sure that you're transparent in what you're trying to do, and really being out there and sharing the data with everyone. And then the last piece is not going into things with a blame culture, but really trying to be one where no one is at blame for what has happened. What we want to do is be moving forward and trying to fix things and make them better. And so I think if your culture and your leadership can adopt those kinds of values, you can begin to have the kinds of conversations that you need to have with faculty, with staff, with others, so that you can be starting to use data in productive ways to be moving forward on your student success initiative. The last thing I want to say before I turn to Tanya is she said something early that I wanted to just sort of echo on, which was, we really are trying to figure out, how do we make the student a part of this? It's their data. We want to be showing them information. We don't want to decimate them, but at the same time, if you're attempting to major in physics and you can't come into the university and place beyond Algebra 2, you're probably not going to be a physics major. So what we ought to tell you is there's going to be greater risk. It's going to take you a longer time to be doing that. Now, I can think of one student in the 40 years I've been here that did do that. So we don't want to say you can't major in physics. We just want to be making sure that you're not going to spend 3 years banging your head trying to be a physics major if you don't have the math background to be able to do it. And I think we can present information to students, and they can be reasonable consumers of that information to be able to make the right choices.
Regarding the student data, I think that's a really important thing. We saw in the ECAR report that came out how students want their data, and it's exactly that, Jack. It's let's make that pathway to degree transparent. Let's put the data in the hands of the students through dashboards so they can see when they walk in that campus and when they walk out of that campus, and when they change that path or they behave in a certain way, like not being successful in a key class, how that's going to impact their progression. I think that is super important, and we know that students really want that. Probably more than they want an alert to say that they're at risk. just going back a little really quick as we wrap up here is, you were talking too about faculty governance, and that's really important on our campus. And I think one of the things you need to remember at your institution is that our data and research that we're doing is no way an evaluation of faculty teaching, and it is no way going to be used to affect their tenure. Those are things that need to be voted on and decided on through faculty governance. What we work to do is we work to identify instructor behaviors that are more likely to lead to success, that we know statistically is going to positively influence student success, and then we try to diffuse those instructor behaviors to faculty through professional development or faculty development, whatever the wording is on your campus. So I think that's a really important distinction there, that this isn't about evaluating faculty, this is figuring out what are faculty doing that's work, and let's diffuse that practice out and about.
So faculty are the key to our work. I mean, it's absolutely essential. We can do all this stuff and have all the data that you would ever want. And unless that learning environment is productive and it's structured in the right way to assist students, you're exactly right. Final comments from our panelists about anything that they would suggest in terms of working with faculty really is the key when we start thinking about how we can make a difference here.
So I'll make one comment, and I think it builds on what David has been saying, and that is by nature, faculty are curious. They want to ask questions, and I think having conversations with them, you begin to see where questions will arise, and being able to work with them to help them get the data to answer those questions is a beginning where I think you can start to have some of these conversations around these activities. And I'll end by saying, one of the things we also try to do in the IT side is we're tightly partnered with the Faculty Development Center. It's not our job to teach pedagogy. We let the Faculty Development Center work with faculty on those related issues.
David, any final comments?
I love big data, but read this book, Small Data. It's about just observations and not getting high-centered on data, so love it.
Very good. Appreciate all the contributions of our panelists today and the participants as well. Alex, thanks for your work in setting this up and making sure that we're ready to go when things started today.
Certainly. To wrap up today's program, I want to thank Rick, Tanya, Jack, and David on behalf of the NMC for taking time to join today's discussion on data. Participants, if you want more information on anything you saw or heard today, let us know by contacting me directly at alex@nmc.org. To learn more about future NMC online programs, I think we have one coming up next month on openness and education. Get involved in our community. Please visit our website at nmc.org. Like us on Facebook or follow us on Twitter at NMCORG. And with that, I want to welcome you into fall tomorrow, and I hope that your semesters are going really well. So thanks for joining us today.